It's the early 1980s, and a 6-year-old me watches Saturday morning cartoons in the living room of a house in Surrey, England. I'm watching, as it turns out, a whole heap of programmes that will tell me little to nothing about what it is to be a girl, and give me some fairly straightforward but largely unattainable goals on how to be a woman when I grow up. My name's Jen, and this is my response to Mikey Neumann's video on lessons animation taught us. The cartoons I watched in the early 1980s were a pretty male-dominated affair. Many were reruns of shows originally made in the 1960s or 70s, but even the more recent editions tended to represent women in a somewhat limited way. Women tended to appear only briefly as romantic interests for the male leads. And as characters we never got to learn much about them, other than the fact that they had a universal sexy yet innocent look nailed.
This is innocent?
But even these appearances by the females of the species were few and far between. Mostly the cartoons featured a male cat chasing a male mouse, or a male hunter chasing a male rabbit, or a male coyote chasing a male roadrunner. One of my favourite cartoons from the era was Danger Mouse.
He's the greatest, he's fantastic, wherever there is danger he'll be there. Danger Mouse, amazing Danger.
Danger Mouse was a quirky British cartoon about a mouse who, with his hamster sidekick Penfold, went on missions to thwart the dastardly plans of the evil Baron Greenback.
Every tourist in the world will be forced to visit my museum.
Your museum?
The Greenback Museum of Barry Manilow Records thieves.
You fiend!
Danger Mouse was very silly and often quite surreal, but I loved it. It seemed to have everything that a child could possibly want in a TV show. But it didn't have women. Not a single reoccurring on-screen female character across 161 episodes. Now, the lack of female characters doesn't take away from how good the show was, but in retrospect, it is strange. At the age of 6, I don't think the absence of women was something that I really noticed. I just accepted that what I was being shown was a male world with male heroes battling male villains.
And now here they are, the most daredevil group of daffy drivers to ever whirl their wheels in the wacky races, competing for the title of the world's wackiest racer.
Equally silly, but with a larger range of characters and a more international appeal, was Wacky Races, a show which was made in the late 1960s but seemed to have almost constant airtime on 1980s kids TV. Wacky Races had a total of 23 characters, one of whom was female, Penelope Pitstop.
A hex on you, dearie. A hex on you. Looks like the hex is on you, ma'am. Your hair is a sign. Ain't it the truth?
Whilst I may not have noticed the lack of women in Danger Mouse, I did notice the use of a token woman in Wacky Races. And it's at this point that I have a confession to make. I hated Penelope Pitstop. I mean, I had the vague impression that I wasn't supposed to hate her because she was pretty and feminine, and she was racing alongside the men and sometimes even winning. But far from being a positive role model, her most memorable catchphrase sort of sums her up. If a character comes across as an undeveloped afterthought, well, that's because she was.
I remember Joe coming into my office and saying, I'm in the middle of a meeting. We're going over the wacky races. And we came to a realization that there were no females in the show at all. And he said, it would help if we got at least one in there. And he said, just put together a car and a girl. She was designed in about 2 hours, I think.
Following her default appearance in Wacky Races, Penelope got her own spin-off series, the annoyingly difficult to say Perils of Penelope Pitstop. The show was an odd one in terms of female representation. On the one hand, we have a female lead character who drives cars, rides motorcycles, swings through jungles and jumps out of planes, and is generally shown as adventurous and actually capable of getting herself out of trouble. On the other hand, we have a naive simpleton who is unable to recognise that her guardian is the same man who is constantly trying to kill her.
Thanks ever so ever for saving my life, Sylvester.
Penelope, my dear, wherever the hooded claw happens to be, you can rest assured that I'll be there also.
This naivety results in her being kidnapped and tied up to face almost certain death as many as 5 times in a single 20-minute episode. One thing Penelope did serve to highlight was the trope of a lone female among an expansive male cast. And this technique was repeated in the cartoons I watched again and again and again. The hapless Penelope pit stop aside, the lone female characters were often pretty cool. Princess in Battle of the Planets was one of my favourites.
Battle of the Planets.
Battle of the Planets was a 1970s Japanese anime which was adapted and dubbed for an American audience and clearly sold to Britain at some stage. It followed a band of young superheroes who wore bird-like capes and protected the planet from the evil Zoltar. Very early on in the show we learn that
Princess is the only female member of the team.
And also, somewhat creepily, that the robot narrator likes to
Pay special attention to Princess. I really don't know just why.
Yes, I wonder. I think it's fair to say that Battle of the Planets wasn't a shining example of feminism at work, but largely Princess was shown as pretty capable and a valuable member of the team. And these attributes apply to many of the isolated or outnumbered women who featured in 1980s cartoons. For which I was grateful, because let's face it, if you have a limited choice of representations, at the very least, you want them to be positive. So what did I learn from the animation of the 1980s? Well, in retrospect, not very much. Certainly nothing insightful about my own gender. I mean, for a medium that had the ability to transport me to far-off planets, fantasy worlds, even 17th century France, it just seemed to have a limited imagination when it came to women. Whilst the men could be heroic or villainous, hot-headed or cowardly, mysterious or wise, the women could be, well, there as well, you know, helping out, doing their womanly thing in a reasonable, caring way that might well involve some gymnastic elegance, but might just as frequently involve being tied up and kidnapped. But what more could you expect when, at a conservative estimate, the female characters were outnumbered by the men by approximately 6 to 1? Some of the old classics still exist today, albeit in a revised form that allows them to sit more comfortably with a modern audience that, frankly, is more discerning than I was as a child. And while some shows still keep the women very much as a minority, the sheer choice of cartoons means that if you want to, you can find women who are heroic or villainous or funny or, well, any of those attributes that in my day were restricted only to the male characters. And this is important because by showing women embodying the whole range of human emotions and characteristics, it reinforces the fact that women, like men, can think and feel and do anything. That women can't actually be defined through a narrow range of behaviours, and in fact that women are, essentially, at our very core, just, you know, people. I've been Jen, and this is my first video essay on my new channel, Musing the Media. Thank you for watching.